My next door neighbor, and I mean literally my next door neighbor, we share that wall, has Trump flags up on her front stoop that were not there a week ago. This morning I had to take my truck into Hagerstown to a garage to get new tires put on it, and on the drive home I noticed at least 3 pro-Trump flags or yard signs that had not been there until a couple days ago, that were not there last week when I took the same drive. Here in Sharpsburg, where I live, just down the street on Main Street, there's a house that is flying a Confederate flag that wasn't there a week ago. We talk about Trump supporters sometimes, and we talk about them in terms of cowardice. And I know that's been a popular talking point lately, especially with elected officials, with Republicans. I've read stories about Republicans on Capitol Hill refusing to look reporters in the eyes when they walk past them in the hallway. Like, it's not just refusing to answer questions. They can't even make eye contact. They are quite deliberately looking the other way in the face of all of the abuses and crimes and moral and physical offenses and atrocities of the Trump administration. And we talk about Trump supporters in the general public being the same way, that they just they're looking away. They're not acknowledging all of the horrors that are happening. They look away from the things that happen down on the U.S.-Mexico border. You know, they look away from family separation. They look away from all of these things. They look away from the mistreatment of Muslims, and they look away from the president's terrible treatment of women and the fact that he's been credibly accused of sexual assault numerous times. They look away from all that. But the fact that there are more visible shows of support for Trump since George Floyd, since the protests in the streets of cities all across this country that have escalated to violence, in most cases either because there were right-wingers in the crowd instigating violence, or because the police themselves escalated peaceful protests into violence by using violence on protesters who were not being violent at the time. In the face of that, and in the face of Trump saying on a phone call to governors, we have to dominate the protesters, and Trump calling out active duty military to use against American citizens exercising their constitutional right to protest. In response to all of that, the fact that I see more visible signs of support for Trump now than I did a week ago tells me that for some of his supporters, they're not looking away. They're looking right at it. They're watching everything that is happening. They are seeing it. And they are loving every minute of it. They don't look at what Trump is doing to these protesters. They don't look at what Trump is doing to the name and the memory of George Floyd and the countless other black men and women who have been unjustifiably killed, who have been murdered by police in this country over the years. They're looking at what Trump is doing in this situation, and they don't think it's anything that they need to look away from. They don't feel the least bit embarrassed or ashamed. They think it's great. They have been encouraged by it. They have been empowered by it to show their support for Trump in the face of that. And I think it's important that we not forget that. I think it's important that we remember that. I was thinking about it earlier, and I thought about, there's this great episode of the classic Twilight Zone called The Shelter, where it starts out with a group of people, different families, from this one street, and they're all over at this guy's house, and they're having a lovely dinner, and they're celebrating something, and everybody gets along, and everybody's friendly, and everybody's great. And then there's an alert on the radio that there's a nuclear bomb scare. There may be nuclear missiles headed to that part of the country, and people are advised to take shelter. And it just so happens that the guy who owns the house has built a fallout shelter. It's just big enough for him and his family, But he figured the rest of his neighbors had built their own fallout shelters because everybody had been talking about that this was a possibility for years, and he prepared, and he figured they had prepared too. So it turns out he was the only one with a fallout shelter on the whole street, and one by one, or one family at a time, the rest of his neighbors who had gone to find shelter for themselves come back asking him if they can stay with him in his shelter. And this tension escalates and reaches a boiling point, and the neighbors turn on each other, and they start saying things to each other that you couldn't have imagined them saying a few minutes ago when they were all having fun and drinking and eating at dinner. And all of the secrets and the buried resentments and the prejudices that everybody has been politely sort of burying and not mentioning all these years come rushing to the surface. And then the crisis ends after it has turned violent, after they have battered down the door of the guy's fallout shelter, which, if it was a real nuclear emergency, it would have doomed not only them outside the shelter, but it would have also doomed the family inside the shelter who were trying to take shelter. And then the crisis passes. Turns out it was a false alarm. Sorry for spoiling this 50-year-old Twilight Zone episode for you if you haven't seen it, but the crisis passes and everybody sort of walks away and goes their separate ways. But they know that they can never have that life that they had at the beginning of the episode again. They know that they can never go back and have that dinner again because now they know. Now, because of the crisis, because of the tension, because of the pressure they were under and the way that they revealed their true selves to everybody, they know who everybody is now. And it's not as simple as just going back to the way things were. And I really feel like we are in a situation similar to that in the United States right now. And a lot of us have known this for the last couple of years, and there are more of us, including many of the people who are taking to the streets protesting right now, who have known this for a lot longer, who have known this all. But for those of us who are staring at it in the starkest image that we have seen of it yet, in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder, in the aftermath of the protests that have been turned into riots as a result of the use of excessive force by police and instigators from the right wing who are trying to discredit the people protesting, who are largely peaceful. And to see Trump's response to it, Trump using this as an excuse to use authoritarian tactics, to use state violence against peaceful protesters who have done nothing wrong, who are doing what they are entitled to do under the Constitution of the United States. And we see our neighbors, literally our neighbors, looking at that and saying, I support Trump. I think Trump's doing a good job. When this is over, whatever that means, and whenever that is, when Trump is out of office, when the Republican Party has been chased from the halls of power, and we are back where we were before Trump took office, when we are back where we were before the Republican Party took off its mask and revealed itself as what it had always been, but revealed itself as that, as the party of racism, as the party of white supremacy, as the party of authoritarianism, masquerading as the party of small government and individual liberty. We can't just let things go back to the way they are. I really, really hope that we all remember who was flying the Trump flag today. After George Floyd, after the protests, after the military being called out on American citizens to clear space for Trump to have a shallow, pointless photo op in front of a church. I hope we all remember the people who saw all of that happening and said, I support the president because of that. I've never shown my support for him publicly before, but I'm going to put out a Trump flag today because of that. I'm going to put out a yard sign for Trump-Pence 2020 because of that. I really hope that we remember that. And that we don't let them forget it. Because they have shown us who they are. It's not just people turning the other way. It's people looking right at it and saying, that's what I want. If that doesn't disappoint you and scare the hell out of you, it should. It certainly does me. And whether the people we're talking about are our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers, our family members, let's not forget this. Let's remember who they are. Because they have shown us. They have shown us. And I really hope we don't forget it. Because the one thing we cannot do, the one thing we cannot afford to do, the one thing that we must not do when Trump is out of office, when all of this momentary tumult is over, the one thing we cannot do is allow ourselves the luxury of saying, well, thank God that's over. Now we can get back to normal. Normal is gone. And maybe in the long run, that's a good thing. But whatever it is, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, however we got here, normal is gone. And we cannot fall into the trap of pretending that, well, we just need to get back to normal. Our neighbors, our friends, our family members who are supporting Trump after all of this, they have made that impossible. And we should make it impossible for them. We need to change a lot of things in this country. And some of those changes can begin just in our own individual lives by remembering who these people are and who they have shown themselves to be to us.